Sounds great.
Okay, so welcome back to Uncomfortable Growth. I am your host, Jenn Lamont, and I created this show because I truly believe that the best version of ourselves happen just outside of our comfort zone. And everyone that I bring on this show has either lived that or experienced that. And today's guest is no different. So before we jump into it, I just want to give a brief intro on why this show and especially this episode are so important to me. So I've been an entrepreneur for 23 years. I made the pivot into real estate, into Ontario real estate. And at the beginning of this year, I was recognized within eXp as number 2 in all of Canada and number 1 in Ontario for a top producing agent. However, I don't say that to brag. I say that because I built this in just over 4 years in an extremely rural market with the mentality that if we help each other, you're actually going to be losing ground. And I remember feeling when I made that pivot so lost in this industry. I actually thought about quitting multiple times. But then I had a conversation with my husband, and I was determined to find a network of collaboration over communication. And I wanted connection over ego because I truly believe we are put on this planet to help each other. And when we do that, everybody wins. So those are the people I bring on this show. And today's guest got his real estate license at the age of 19, became the number 1 Keller and Williams agent by the age of 28, not in his state, not in his country, but in the entire world. Co-founded a private lending company that originated $2 billion in loans, and then went on to create a real estate tech platform that captured 80% of the market. And today, he is the CEO of eXp Realty, one of the largest brokerages on the planet, all meanwhile being a husband and a dad who prioritizes making his family a part of his journey instead of just watching it. Leo, I am extremely honored and feel extremely privileged to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being part of Uncomfortable Growth.
Thank you for having me, Jen. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. So I'm going to start exactly where I start with everyone. I want to start before the resume, before the titles. If you could just describe yourself in your own words, who is Leo?
I like that question. And I do a lot of podcasts where I'm both being interviewed and interview others. So I always appreciate unique questions that aren't kind of like robotic answers. I'm unique in the sense, like everybody else, but my childhood was very different. I grew up overseas. I didn't move to the United States until I was 12 years old. And my dad directed health development projects all over Latin America. So I lived in 6 countries before graduating high school. And so I was constantly the new kid. And I think that had quite a bit to do with my resilience, right? When you grow up somewhere and you're kind of used to the same environment, try moving countries every couple of years. And so I got very comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's been super interesting because I think it's a very formative part of who I've become, right? So I've pivoted industries and jumped into something that I've never been qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that's the reoccurring theme of my life. But I would also argue that that's everyone's journey, right? And I think we forget that, right? None of us have done this before. None of us are getting out alive. And so that's been a very driving thought process for me of like, look, if I only get one ride in this thing, I'm going to have the most fun I can possibly have and feel very uncomfortable. And I think the best example I can say that resonates with most people, because, if you're a parent, you had that experience when they handed you your first kid at the hospital. And it was overwhelming in the best way possible, but it was probably the most terrifying thing when they said, go home. And you kind of look around like, who's the adult who's going to come with me? Like, how do I keep this thing alive? And then we just do it, right? And if you happen to have 2 or 3 kids, by the time the second or third kid arrives, it is old hat, and you can like, all right, pick them up like a football. If he cries, it's okay. It's probably a dirty diaper. They're hungry. And if they run a fever, it's like, all right, just give them some Motrin or some Tylenol. But like versus the first kid, you're on the phone with 911 with your mother, your father. I distinctly remember crying with my wife in the pharmacy aisle because we were having problems breastfeeding, and we were like, if we give her formula, it's going to ruin her life. And
With the pressures, yes.
I find that to be so comparable to every other journey, right? And I say to people, I wasn't qualified at 19 years old to sell anybody a house. I wasn't qualified at 27 to negotiate with Fannie and Freddie and the FDIC to sell foreclosures. I wasn't qualified to start a lending platform and convince hedge funds to buy my debt. I wasn't qualified to start a tech company. I don't have a tech degree. I can't write a single line of code. I wasn't qualified to raise money from some of the most sophisticated investors on the planet. And what made me qualified to run a publicly traded company? I am a realtor who has an art degree. Nothing in my path says I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll fill in the words that most people don't want to admit. It's like worthy, good enough, right?
Absolutely.
And I just remind everybody, it's like no one has done anything until they choose to do it. And so the name of your podcast and kind of how you opened is probably the most important thesis of life, right? All growth comes from the edges. When everything is simple and automatic and comfortable, zero growth happens. And I also tell people, like, think of your favorite fictional and non-fictional stories ever. They're
Mm-hmm.
never about someone who lived an average life, right? It was overcoming adversity. It was standing up and being extremely uncomfortable, whether, not a single story you can think of was ordinary, right? And I also think about the fact that I love words and I say words matter. And I'll do a keynote in Canada if you're joining us in Vancouver called Words Matter. And I break down how everything's created in language and words are generative, not descriptive. But the word extraordinary is something I like to think a lot about. In your extraordinary in your accomplishments as an agent. But there's the word extra to the ordinary, right? Like you don't get to have an extraordinary life without doing extraordinary behavior, right? To get
Mm-hmm.
the result. So I'll pause right there because I can go off on tangents, but
No, it resonates with me so much. Extra is something that, can be seen as a positive or a negative. It's that mental battle, something even as you do things differently or uncomfortably, you worry about, being too much or being extra. So when I asked you, I'm going to pivot here because I can go on tangents too. When I asked you to come on this podcast, and you said yes, I was extremely nervous. I'm actually outside of my comfort zone right in this moment, but I started doing my homework on you right away. And yes, you are the CEO of eXp, but I hadn't actually really dove in to understand who you were. And when I went on your Instagram, the first thing I noticed is you actually didn't lead with CEO. You led with husband and father. And if that's the first thing I noticed, now, I might just see that because that's my whole world, it's my family, but other people would notice that too. Can you speak to why you lead with husband and father first instead of C?
because it is, right? I think I've had the unique experience in life of having multiple chapters in my life, very, very like clear, distinct public ones. And in them, so I think most entrepreneurs, there's a very normal human confusion that you are the role you are currently in. And I am intimately aware of this feeling from going through it when you sell a company. Most people don't actually experience that. And so creating a business is probably one of the most personal things you ever do. It becomes your identity. And I've exited 3 companies, and simple things like your email address is no longer yours. Like you literally thank you very much. I just paid you a lot of money for your company. Leo at no longer exists. We own it. And by the way, we're going to have it forwarded to us because there's potential leads and money that comes through that email. So again, I've been extremely lucky, and I attribute a lot of my journey to luck, which I know people are like, no, you work really hard, but it's kind of my philosophy in life about just being extremely grateful.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had my identity ripped away multiple times. And again, I feel just lucky it happened super early. So I'm not confused of who I am. The current role that I'm in for you guys is a role. It is not who I am. Like
Mm-hmm.
I am a husband first. And it's not an accident that husband's before father, because she's my partner in life, in business, in this journey that we get to go through. And the kids came second, right? We were
Mm-hmm.
together a very long time before we had kids. And, I adore my children. They're my whole world. But I also recognize that 95% of the time I'll spend with them happens between 0 and 18 years old. And when they go on into the world and hopefully self-actualize and do amazing things, it'll be me and her again without
Yeah.
them. And so, yeah. And by the way, I have it on my LinkedIn like that too, which people are always surprised by. because like, again, I have no plans on leaving. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but like, I'm not the CEO of eXp first. I'm like, my personal email is leo@leopareja.com. And I learned that lesson after I sold my first company. And then, by the way, I went and bought Ariana's, my mom and dad's, my kids, so they're ready. Because I don't identify as the role I play. And I have lots of analogies for it. Like, I'm very specific with words. And one of the things I changed at the company when I got here, and so if you catch it anywhere, it's an accident and let me know. But I told the team, I never want to hear any of you call this company a family. I think it's disingenuous. And I'll give you the example. We all have family members that we wouldn't trust to park our car.
That's true.
But that doesn't mean I would fire them. I love them. I will take care of them. I will give them money. I will pick up the tab. There's an obligation that I choose to have. I think of this company and all businesses as teams. And if we use the sports analogy, we are a high performing team. We're a championship team. And what that means, in order to do that, to execute at the level I like to execute in business, I have to attract the best players for the position that exist in the marketplace. And I want to pay them what they're worth. And I want to celebrate them. And I'm the quarterback and I get to throw the ball. And I want to compensate you for what you're worth. But the thing about high performing teams and excellent players is they demand excellence from others. So if someone on the team is not pulling their weight, they don't get to be on the team. And it's not mean. It's not non-emotional. It's actually to protect culture. And in business, sometimes you have to reduce teams. You have to optimize. You have to allow for the best players to compete. And in business, I'm extremely clear with my language that this is not a family. My family is my family. And I think of the agents not purely as a team, but as a tribe. You can't leave a family, right? Not very. So I think when folks communicate, like how they communicate matters. So the husband and father is not an accident. It's been there for quite a while. It's the constant in my life, right? The stuff that comes below it are the, player positions I choose to play for that season of my life. So it's not an accident. It was super intentional. And even the order in which, I'm not a father and husband. I'm a husband and father.
That is amazing. That resonates with me so much. And I get to it a little bit later. I want to just fast forward before being the husband and the father. You got your real estate license at 19 while you were in college. Now, most 19-year-olds are thinking about, what bar they're going to or what's happening on the weekend, especially in college. What brought you into that real estate office that day?
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wired differently. I've always kind of been entrepreneurial, and I was always obsessed with doing something big. And by the way, I was a frat boy, and I did go to the bar. I've always prescribed to the life integration, right? I don't believe in balances. Probably one of the more visually perfect ways to view balance has been like a high level gymnast or ballerina, right? Who do things that for most of us seem impossible from a balance standpoint. Think of the bars or any of that stuff where people are physically doing stuff that us mere mortals can't do, that look balanced, but it's actually extreme counterbalance, moving very quickly, and or tension, like extreme tension. There is no such thing as balance, right? So I think about that a lot, but I just always knew I was going to do something. I applied to college to go do graphic design, and I just picked the year 2000, which is probably the worst year in the history of the world to get into building websites. And I had applied to do a program in the School of Entrepreneurship at my college. And my freshman year of college, my plan went up in smoke because that was the first economic bubble I lived through. And then I read a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which put me on this obsessive path. And at 19, I already fell behind in my mind. I felt behind, which is incredibly funny because I had my whole life in front of me. And by the way, I'm 43 now, and I still feel like I'm just a child, right? The irony of wisdom is like the more I get of it, the more I'm like, oh, wow, I don't know anything. And I have so much to learn. I think some of us are wired differently. And because both my parents are PhDs and highly educated and kind of went the super, super traditional path. But since I was like 16, I can remember going, I'm not going to work for 30, 40 years for the same company and then go play golf. Like I want to do something different. Again, luck. I feel extremely lucky. Found what I wanted to do at 18, 19 years old. Like And, I feel lucky in the exact same way that I feel lucky about meeting my wife, and she was 21, I was 24. In both regards, I feel like I did not waste any time. I've been blessed enough to spend the time doing what I love and with whom I love.
That's amazing. So you decided during college to go in and have an interview at a real estate office. Now, you did very well,
So
obviously.
that's actually not how it happened. So I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I got obsessed. I wanted to become a real estate investor. I showed up to a local real estate investor association meeting, and I got the courage to ask the guy running it if he would mentor me and I would work for free, just like Robert did in his book. And he actually turned me down, and he referred me to a coach who said, if you want to learn about real estate, I'll refer you to this guy. I don't have time to spend time. His specific sentence was, I don't have time for snot-nosed kids, which I didn't understand until I had kids, and kids do have a lot of snot.
That's
But
fair.
I called this guy, and he said, I can teach you everything you want to know about real estate. It's only going to cost you $10,000 in 2001. So adjusted for inflation, that was probably a lot more money. And unbeknownst to my parents, my friends, I sold my car and wired a stranger all my money. And luckily, he was not a criminal, and he kept his word. And we went into an intense mentoring relationship on psychology of sales. So we would role play. He would teach me. He was the one who really embedded how much language controls everything. And I became really, really good at very early on understanding ready, willing, and able. And I think where most salespeople in any sales funnel, real estate, blending, tech, misunderstand that, right? I think the grossly misunderstood portion of a funnel is identifying ready, willing, and able. So like ready, yes. Able, no, they don't have the money. Yeah, I love your product, but I don't have any money. Yes, have the money. Yes, ready, but willing? Nah, I'm too busy. We're too entrenched in our current workflow. We have legacy tech. We don't have buy-in from the whole organization. And, translate that to the kitchen table or sitting in a boardroom trying to do an enterprise offer deal. And so that led to me getting my license because it was required as part of the training because I wanted to be an investor. And the kind of tipping point moment was my landlord and I disagreed on a volume on a Tuesday at my rental. And he said I had to move out. And I was in the office going through the MLS because I joined the brokerage of the guy who turned me down once I got my license. And he said, talk to the loan officer if you qualify to buy. And I said, I'm a child. That's not possible. He said, you don't know that. And it turned out that I had bought a car, paid it off, waiting tables, and I sold it to give my money to this other guy, which gave me really good credit. So I had great credit. I was 20 at the time because this was kind of a year later into the process. And I qualified for a low down payment loan, as in the United States called FH. So 3% down got me a house. And I negotiated the seller to pay all my closing costs, and my commission was 3%. So I had to convince my mom and dad to co-sign me for a loan and lend me the money while, we went to the bank at 9 a.m. My dad went to work. And by the time he got home for dinner, I brought him back his down payment because I got a commission payment. And I made, more money in that transaction than I made in the previous 12 months waiting tables.
So I actually read somewhere that you made 300,000 at that young of an age, and for it to happen that quickly. I'm wondering did you find that made you wise, or did you find as, a young kid,
No.
did it make you reckless?
No, that made me extremely arrogant and reckless. So I made that first sale. It was like May, June, because it was right when school was ending. And I then had one transaction under my belt, and I wrote a script with a hook, which was, let me talk to your parents about your housing for next year. That was my script to anybody in my fraternity or sorority girl who would take my call. And once I got the parents on the phone, it was a simple hook. What if I could show you how to cover housing for the next 3 years with the same dollar amount you have earmarked for next year's housing cost? And all of a sudden they're like, say more, right? So literally the amount of money you'd spend on room and board for next semester, I can get you a house that I will then rent out all the rooms for, and you'll be out of pocket $0 for your child. And this was 2002, so it was like right timing. 2002, 2003, which the U.S. market was doing this, and I sold 11 homes and made $60,000 6 months in, which to me is a really good comparison of like play the hand that you're dealt. right? Like whatever you tell yourself of why you can't. I was a scrawny college kid, and I figured an angle that worked in my story. It's you're playing poker. I had a 7-4 offsuit, and I figured out how to get to the flop. And that's what I encourage people to do. And like in this modern world of social media, which is now interest media, it's probably the coolest moment in the history to find your own tribe, right? Like whatever you are, age, ethnic background, life experience, there is a tribe of humans who will relate to your version of the world and feel comfortable doing business with you if you put yourself out there. And so that was like sophomore year, junior year. And then by my senior year, like, calendar years are different than college. So half the year I was already out of school. I did $306,000 in GCI at like 22 years old. And yes, I went and bought like 14 properties. I thought I was God's gift to real estate. And this was 2007. I decided to go independent, and I spent all my money opening up an independent. And then I was sued for tortious interference by my former brokerage. And then the market collapsed, and I cried a lot and learned what humble pie was and started rebuilding.
So you answered the question before I even got to ask it. So in 2008, your net worth was 5 million.
But
And
it was like 2006, 2007. By 2008, it was like negative 1 million, right?
okay, yeah, and then that was it. In like 6 months, you went to like negative 1 million. So most people would ask what that did to you financially, but what I want to ask is what did it do to you emotionally? Because I think that's where a person really changes.
Yeah, no, it almost broke me, right? The breaking is such an interesting thought process because breaking is not a permanent state, right? So you have to get up, and I vividly remember calling my parents who had moved overseas, and I was asking my mom, like, if you just lend me X amount of dollars, I can figure it out. And I remember she goes, absolutely not. And she said, for a couple reasons. One is everything you've touched has turned to gold since you were a kid. And she specifically said, you've never eaten humble pie, and you need,
to.
well, she said, you need a second serving. So you need to figure this out however it plays out for you. But you can do anything you put your mind to. And so by the way, my mom is a PhD in psychology. And it was what I needed. It's what I needed in life.
Absolutely.
Fundamentally changed my DNA. Like, and again, it was a very, very dark place in my own head to the point where I consciously put in like AirPods and listened to Tony Robbins or The Secret or Edgar Tollard or anything that was positive, because the little voice inside my head was so toxic. I needed to actually physically drown it out. Left to my own devices was the scary place.
And you started studying economic developments and cycles. And then I read somewhere as well, I really did do my homework on you, that you started reaching out to older and wiser people to understand patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So you focused on that instead of focusing on the pain of almost losing, well, not almost, of losing everything. What was it? What instinct was it that made you do that? How do you, because most people who lose everything don't just be like, okay, I'm going to start studying history and patterns. And I think I know the answer to this now after speaking to you so much in the first little bit, but.
So one thing is I've been intentional about having mentors my whole life, and not like coaches, yes, but a mentor. So someone that I want to be like when I grow up. And I just was blessed to have found some amazing humans who gave me a lot of themselves and insight. And context is everything. You've probably heard me say context is my favorite word.
Mhm.
And I see it with agents right now in Canada and the US specifically because of our financial economic situation in both countries, where you have a great year, right? You have your best year ever in 2021. And then you have a bad year in 2022 and 2023 and 2024. And without context, you go, something's wrong with me. I'm doing something wrong. And then that little voice inside your head goes crazy. It's like, yeah, it's because you were full of shit. You were a loser. You weren't actually that good. You were a creature of the market. It's just knowing the difference. It's like, all right, if both countries dropped 40% in transactions over a 3-year period, if you're only down 20%, you're actually outperforming the market by double digits. That's crazy. That's incredible. Right. And so when the version of that for me is like, okay, So this has happened before. Yeah, it's happened before. It happened in 1992, which was called the savings and loan crisis. It led to a lot of foreclosures. And so I was lucky enough to ask some people, like, what's going on? Like, and I'm talking about like when the music stopped, because when from the music stopping into the collapse, it was actually a long time. And that's what most people don't quite comprehend. Like the bottom of the market in the US, like we peaked in 6 or 7, and the bottom 11. Right. So it was a multi-year downward cycle. And so that's where, if you like what happened in 92 to 95 in the US, well, we had the savings and loan crisis. The government set up what's called their Resolution Trust Corporation. And the agents who did the best during that phase learned how to sell foreclosures. I was like, okay, well, no two patterns ever happen identically. So in like 2007, before the world ended, it's like, well, where are all the loans? And, you know, I didn't know any of these words. It was like, well, loans were sold as collateral debt obligations to Wall Street, or they went to Fannie or Freddie. Okay, and then what happens if like the banks collapse? Well, then they go to the FDIC. So then I literally got on a plane and flew to Dallas, where they kept Fannie and Freddie and the FDIC, and just showed up at the door. And I flew to Utah and LA and just about anywhere I found that had foreclosure management businesses. And I'd show up with donuts and say, hey, can I talk to someone about selling houses in Virginia? And they were like, huh? And they would let me walk in, and they're like, where are you from? And can I buy you guys lunch? And I bought the whole floor lunch, and then I'd leave with like 18 listings. So history has a pattern of repeating itself, not in the identical manner. And then, by 2010, 2011, I was asking the lender, how much inventory do you have left? And like, we probably have 18 months left. And so by the time most agents were like, oh, this art foreclosure stuff is the thing, I was already trying to figure out how to get out of it, because I could see that it only had 12 or 18 months left. And then that's when I actually noticed that hedge funds started buying houses. So I flew to New York instead and said, hey, can I help you buy some houses? And can you explain to me how you're buying the houses? And then actually I went home and I only helped one fund, and then I raised the fund and bought my own properties. And that's how I ended up lending money.
That was going to be my question. Is that how you got into co-founding the private lending company?
Yeah. So perfect example of like being very uncomfortable. So I volunteered as member and leader of NAREP, National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, which put me in very uncomfortable situations in the best way possible. So very vivid memory that I recall as pivotal as late 20s, early 30s. I get a call from the founder of the events of the organization saying, hey, can you get to this meeting for me tomorrow morning? Because I can't physically get there. I said, sure. And put on a suit and said, oh, I just got to take notes. And he said, yep. And turns out I was at the White House. And I didn't know that, because we think of the White House as 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But that's not the address you show up to. You show up on a side street, and it's an Eisenhower building. And little old me was sitting in a room with like the head of FHFA and Fannie and Freddie and FHA and chief of staff to the president. And I was in the room when they made a lot of the laws, or heard the original versions of the proposals for the laws. And again, I try to go where the puck is going. And I said, okay, if these laws go into effect, which I think they should, they will have a unintended consequence that you can't borrow money from banks anymore to flip houses in the United States. Like, it basically got outlawed through the CFPB with the ability to repay. And so I said, I think investors are going to need money. And thankfully I was right. And so a lot of my journey has just been able to analyze information and go, directionally, this is probably going to happen. So, a lot of times people will accuse me of having a crystal ball, which I do not. But I just consume a lot of information and go, okay, probabilistically, this is more likely to happen, right? Like, a perfect example is I've been very involved with NAREP, and for 20 years, I've been saying, hey, over time, Latinos are going to be a bigger part of the buying demographic and who decides elections and. And not because I'm Latino or have a preference. It's, because I look at census data, right? We have an average of 3 kids. We get married younger, family first. There's a lot of just data. Like in 2025, US housing homeownership rate would have actually gone negative if it wasn't for Latino home buyers. And the only reason we had positive homeownership growth in the United States in 2025 was that one group. And again, I just look at the data, right? So it's like, if I'm going to build something, if I'm going to invest in something, if I'm going to pay attention to something over the next decade, what's the probability of that growing? And that's how I make decisions.
It's incredible. What I'm picking up is like, you always hear the cliche, knowledge is power. In your case, not that it's power, knowledge and always being the student has really kept you growing. And it's incredible and very inspiring. I'm looking at the time and I know that you are extremely busy. So I have a million more things I could talk to you about, but I do want to jump to eXp selfishly. You became the CEO in 2004 or 2024.
No,
You've been here a lot longer than you knew, but that, like, it was almost immediately that you had to deal with the NAR settlement. I think it was that weekend you had to work all weekend, and then you had to get on a virtual conference with 50,000 agents and speak to it. What did the Saturday night before that look like for you?
So that's a perfect example of it in the rearview mirror versus what actually happened, right? So Friday I was fishing. It was my day off, and I was with 3 eXp agents in the Keys. And I found out when everybody else found out that NAR settled for $418 million, and we were left out, and we were sued for $200 billion with a B. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, talk about interesting. And I was not the CEO.
Yeah, and you still became it. That is incredible.
And that weekend was very loud. Agents were DMing me, texting me, crying. A lot of single-led households where the breadwinner is an agent, and they said, I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids. Like, again, there was a lot of uncertainty. It turned out to be not as transformational as people expected it to, but there was a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with Glenn that weekend with our lawyers, and I said, hey, we need to make a decision by Monday. We're going to actually say things, or we're going to say no comment. We're litigating. And I said, based on the inbound fear, we need to make a decision, and I'll do it. I'll speak to it because I actually understand it. But I'm just letting you know, I don't know if that's going to cost us more money, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, either no comment or we're gonna be transparent. And I had no idea 50,000 people were going to show up. I thought it was going to be maybe a couple thousand, because nothing in history gave us an indication that we'd garner that much attention. And so I went live at 1:00 with Holly, and at the peak during the YouTube broadcast, 53,000 people showed up.
Wow.
The next day, I got a call from Jack Miller from T360, who puts out the Power 200 list. And he said, we think you've garnered the single largest audience in the history of real estate, period, ever, of anything. Live, in person, concurrent live, which told us a couple of things. One is that people were starving for information and guidance. And two, that there was a lot of fear. And I got a lot of inbound demand from media. So I ended up talking to everyone in a night, like a 90-day period, but that was like Monday. And then by Friday, Glenn called me and he said, you are the CEO of the company, which, again, the long version is I had already turned him down like 3 times in the subsequent 2 years, because I said I was having fun being the fun uncle and he was dad. And I've always been the founder and CEO. By the way, this is my first job I've ever had, ever. And I called him and I said, what changed? And he said, I had a meeting with a lot of our top leaders in the company, and they demanded that you be the CEO. And he laughed because he said, I told them I wanted you to be CEO, right? Like, we're not in disagreement at all.
Right.
But it was, I think the exact sentence he said is, they said we need a wartime general, and that's you.
That's incredible.
So, the way you phrased it is like, then that happened. Like, no, I'm CEO only because that happened. If the status quo would have stayed the status quo, I probably would have preferred to stay in the background. But obviously, I'm all in. This is now very much part of my journey and my story. And as Glenn put it, this is now our story, not his story versus my story. But and back to how I opened, like, you don't know what you're capable of until someone hands you that child or gives you that opportunity, or you decide you're going to try something. So now I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company.
It's amazing. I actually joined eXp in October, and my first eXp con, you were introduced. So I didn't really know eXp before you. And I'm a bit biased, but I'm a lifer for eXp. I'm just obsessed with the company. So I'm going to quickly just ask you about eXp 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
If we can just touch on what that means, not for, the large teams, but for the rural small agent. What does eXp 2.0 mean for an agent like myself, who on a Thursday morning in a small town in Ontario? Yeah.
So everything has seasons to it. And I coined eXp 2.0 when I took over, because our first 11 years were the disruptive new model, right? We were introducing a concept to the world of borderless, brickless, cloud-based brokerage that was single entity owned. Like, appreciate that that didn't exist before us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was basically regional, corporate-owned, family-owned businesses, Royal LePage in Canada, all the ones in the US, and franchises. That was it. Before us, there was not a single 50-state brokerage company. Think about that. And, in Canada, 9 provinces, right, as a single entity. But now there's a bunch of us.
Mm-hmm.
We invented that category. And so the realization for me is, in our journey, we are now in the incumbent era. And that's something you can own and embrace, right? And so what got you there won't get you to the next place. So we had to stop thinking as like, oh, we're the cute startup disruptor. No, we're one of the big kids at the table. We set the agenda. We set the rules of engagement. We can now, again, and I don't take any of that lightly, right? Like, if I make a decision, I know it affects a lot of people and industry and families. And so I don't take any of my decisions lightly at all, because I'm aware that how they have impact, and I think through of the unintended consequences we can create. But 2.0 is we are the category king in cloud. And I view us as Netflix, Meta, Amazon of cloud. And so what does that mean? That I want to be the fastest broker to respond to your questions. I want to pay you as fast as humanly possible. I want to give you as much access to education as possible. And to sum up what I view the company as, it is a platform to allow entrepreneurs to build whatever size dream they want to build, right? Not to prescribe to you what you will be when you get here, right? It's like, look, we're operating software for your business, right? And if you want to sell 12 homes, that's awesome. If you want to sell 1,200 homes, that's also awesome. If you want to have 0 people in your revenue share, that's awesome. And if you want to have 13,000, that's also awesome, right? It is truly a choose your own adventure, which is what I think operating software is, right? Like, I don't determine what software you're going to build. I just want to give you the best ecosystem to do it in.
It's one of the things that brought me to eXp. I have 6 more minutes of your time, so I'm going to jump to what resonates the most with me. So I've watched and listened to a lot of your podcasts, a lot of your talks over the last little while in preparation for today. And the one thing that, no matter what you talk about every single time, no matter what the topic is you talk about your family in the way that most people just don't. And I need to share something with you, because I've been in sales for 23 years and have had lots of mentors and coaches. And on multiple occasions, I have been told that mixing your family, your marriage, and your business can blur those lines and make you lose one of them. And today's episode made me truly feel like what I'm doing, because my husband and my 2 boys are my entire world. And I won't get emotional, but they are. And I've always felt like I'm battling, making them a part of it, or am I working too much? And I just said, when I got into real estate, I said, forget it. They're going to be a part of this. We're going to do this together. And you're the first person, someone of your success, that has made me feel like I'm going to do it okay with my family by my side. So I can't thank you enough for that. It means the world. I genuinely appreciate you taking time out of your busy day and doing this, because I don't know many CEOs that would sit down with an agent that is just a small little agent in Ontario that would take the time to do this. I could chat with you probably for another hour, but I will see you at eXpCon. I am emceeing Monday morning, so I will see you there, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit more.
Well, thank you for having me. I will see you in Vancouver. And again, like, no one can impose rules on you, right? And the era that we're in, I think, is really cool. And I'll close with that thought. I'll never forget, I saw a Gary Vaynerchuk video in 2008 where he was super excited about YouTube. And he was ranting, and he said, in 10 years, we'll know exactly who everyone is, and you cannot hide it, because we just live very transparently now. And so I think that really resonates with me. And that's why I live my very real truth in public. And just about everything I say gets recorded, and it's been recorded for decades. So that's the other really cool part of the world today. It's harder to play a character. One, it's exhausting. And, one of the cool things about leadership is you can actually model and demonstrate for others a version of the world that should be attainable. So I very publicly say, like, you guys are a distant second in my priority to my family. And that's okay, right? Because, like, I want everyone to remember that, like, when you take your last breath, and I'm in midlife right now, and they say it's the most difficult time because you have a lot of pressure from your kids, your career, and aging parents. And like, my parents both were extraordinary in their fields, but no one gives a shit anymore. Like, it doesn't matter the impact. My father spoke to 10,000 people at a time and was transformational to countries in certain points in their history. But my kids care, right? Like, he put my kids to bed last night when my wife and I went out to dinner last night. And that's all that matters.
It's amazing. And I see you so much more on a human level and more as a husband and a father. And you will have no idea how much this conversation meant to me. So I thank you. This is Jenn Lamont from Uncomfortable Growth. If anything from this episode resonated with you, please share it. And if you're thinking about joining eXp, I think this episode shows a true picture, an honest picture of who's leading it. Thanks again, Leo.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Right. That was incredible. That was a wrap. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I know you're busy. I made it on time.
No, and I forgot to say it on there, but like, it's such an example to me. Like, most people don't ask. I literally, when did you hear me say, "Hey, just invite me to your podcast and I'll show up"? What event was it at?
It was actually eXp in Kitchener, the development day. And you said, nobody's going to do it. And I remember saying to my husband, holy crap, I'm going to do it.
So it like that. I asked you where you heard me say that. I think you're the only person who reached out from that single event.
Yeah.
So, by the way, it's super easy to say yes, because most humans are ordinary and don't do things.
Yeah. Well, I'm here for it. This year is about getting uncomfortable. So getting on stage at eXpCon also scares
Jen,
the living.
What's your husband's name? I'd like to meet him. Can you pop in and say hi?
Yeah. This is Rob. He'll be at eXpCon too.
Hey, Rob. Nice to meet you.
I have headset.
Make sure you come shake my hand at eXpCon.
Yeah. We're really looking forward to it.
We're like full on professional.
Awesome. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, man. Thanks again. This was amazing. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. All right. Is it fully uploaded? Can I drop off?
You can definitely drop off. I'll tag you and everything. Bye. Hit stop record.